welcome to episode 330 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and this is the final episode of Metroidvania Month, our celebration of that very specific kind of RPG-adjacent action-adventure game that started with Metroid in the 1980s, which is why we recorded the Super Metroid episode a little while ago, and continued in the 1990s with Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is where that second half of the portmanteau comes from, and also why we recorded a Castlevania Aria of Sorrow episode a couple weeks ago. So, before we continue that discussion and analysis, let's introduce the panelists I have here to talk about Salt Sanctuary, another Metroidvania game that brings some other influences into the table. The panelists are Jono, Logan.
Hello, everyone.
And Tina, Olah.
Hi.
So, Jono, Tina, Salt Sanctuary. When we were picking a third game for Metroidvania Month, we specifically wanted to do an indie Metroidvania game of the 2010s. Because, again, Metroid has been popular for decades. Castlevania sort of reinvented itself with that Metroidvania format, starting with Symphony of the Night and then continuing with several GBA and DS and other games in the 2000s. And that genre mashup, or well, it's not really a mashup, that sort of specific kind of game was so popular among indie developers that there was an unusual number of indie Metroidvania games of various styles and qualities in the 2010s. And a lot of them I really like. I enjoyed Dust and Elysian Tale. I'm a big fan of Time Spinner. That one might be my favorite of the bunch.
It's really good.
Yeah, Time Spinner's great. There's Valdis Abyssal Story. There's a bunch, and I could list them over. I could find a list and just recite it, but I won't. We decided to. I think maybe because we were just interested in the look of the game, we decided to make Salt Sanctuary our indie Metroidvania of choice for this month. And I will say that I knew this game had a specific influence besides Metroidvania, but I didn't realize exactly how much more it was of that. Salt Sanctuary is heavily inspired by Souls-likes, and by which I mean the mostly games from From Software, starting with Demon's Souls, continuing with 3 Dark Souls games, as well as Bloodborne, Sekiro, and most recently Elden Ring. Salt Sanctuary has a lot of Souls influence, and it might be more Souls than Metroidvania, I think. Separate from your feelings of the game, starting with you, Tina, what was your sort of overall impression of Salt Sanctuary, and what do you think about the Metroidvania parts and Souls parts? Just briefly, abridged version.
So I thought it was very difficult, but I enjoyed it. Like, I still haven't finished it, but I want to keep going. I really like the lore. I like the setting. I've never played a Souls game before, so this was kind of interesting. I have played another game before where it has that system where you lose all your experience when you get killed. It's called Dandara, but it was more like an action game, it didn't have so many RPG elements. So this was pretty unique. It didn't feel too much like a Metroidvania to me, and I think one of the reasons it didn't have a map.
Yes, maybe my number one problem with the game was the lack of a map. I found that not completely maddening, but there were many points where I wish I could have just pressed a button to look at the map. But which Salt Sanctuary denies you. I also have never played a Souls game, or I should say, I have not made any meaningful progress in a Souls game. I played Demon's Souls for the PS3 many, many years ago, beat the first boss, and that was as far as I got, that game has, I think, probably more than 20 bosses, so that I did not make it far. But I've never really put hard time into a Souls game. And I think Salt Sanctuary really is a 2D Souls game dressed as a Metroidvania game. And it's again more Souls than Metroidvania. But Jono, similar question. Like, what was your overall impression of Salt Sanctuary, and its Metroidvania elements versus its Souls elements?
Yeah, it has many of the Metroidvania, I guess, conventions of the genre. So it has a large interconnected world with sections that are easily connected to each other. Progression is often locked behind item upgrades, or in this case, brands. That they brand you with to give you the special abilities like wall jumps or a sort of double jump. And with those, you can explore different areas, and you can go back and revisit old areas and find new places and new items and things like that using these new abilities. So that's very, very Metroidvania. I would say that it's pulling much more from the Vania part of the portmanteau than the Metroid part. And obviously, by pulling in, I mean, there's been a lot of Souls influence going into a lot of Metroidvanias in the last couple of years. For example, well, obviously, this game, Salt Sanctuary, Hollow Knight is like tough as nails. Bosses, and the same thing. Like when you die, you have to go back to where you died to get your currency and stuff. And if you die before then, it's lost forever. Same thing with what's the game? I'm blanking on the name of the game. But my point is that Souls like has really gotten in there, and for good reason. I mean, Souls like the challenge level, the having to learn boss patterns, dying repeatedly, being part of the game, not punishment. Like ideally not punishment, and you just having to accept that and move on without getting super frustrated. Yeah, that's pretty Souls-like. So yeah, this game has a lot of Metroidvania elements, a lot of Souls, and I am in complete agreement. The lack of the map was tricky in places. I feel for me it made the world feel less interconnected because I couldn't see how it was connected. Like I would have to keep the map in my head rather than being able to click to a map and say, okay, this area goes into this area goes into this area. I would have liked that, but that's just stylistically part of what the game was going for, I guess.
And the game helps that a little bit by making stone guides very abundant, so it's not that hard to fast travel between the different save points, which are called sanctuaries. We'll go into sanctuaries more in a bit, but you're right. This game has the Souls spirit of like picking up, going to the point where you died to reclaim your lost experience or resources, in this is mostly salt, and by having sort of boss battles focused on pattern recognition and defensive strategy as much as offensive strategy, but having them but like giving a feeling of risk to both exploring and boss fights is very Souls. I associate the going and finding your remains to reclaim your resources thing. I associate that with Diablo 2 for the most part, which is definitely something that they did in 2001 when that was hot. But it's become a characteristic of the Souls games, starting with Demon Souls. And From Software sort of used to be a really weird niche developer of action games, of stuff like King's Field and 3D Dot Game Heroes, which is a game I like a lot. There's a lot of Zelda and Dragon Quest in 3D Dot Game Heroes.
It's a game I've always wanted to play, but I've never been able to because I don't have a PlayStation 3 and they've never re-released it on anything.
Yeah, it's a little weird. I still have my PlayStation 3. It doesn't have the spot of honor on my living room anymore. It's relegated to my basement and old consoles, but I do have that game. It's an interesting one. But it's like what if you wanted to play Zelda 1 and they put in some Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy imagery in there and also gave you a sword that was 4 times longer than you, is kind of the vibe of that thing. But like you upgrade your sword by increasing the number of pixels in it. but they've become the Souls developer since 2009 and have gotten hugely popular, to which point Elden Ring, their most recent and possibly best game yet, has become a mega hit. But we're not here to talk about Elden Ring or From Software. We're here to talk about Salt Sanctuary, which is not made by From Software. It's made by
Ska?
Ska Studios, which is I'll find it. I know they weren't they were surprised me a little bit. Yeah, which is a Seattle-based studio that has mostly made games for the Xbox Live Arcade. They made a couple sort of unusual stylized action games, mostly themed around the undead. But this is sort of their most ambitious game yet, and it's their first release outside of just the Xbox environment. I think they made they were sort of an XBLA indie studio, but now Salt Sanctuary was a big hit, and their Salt Sanctuary is getting a sequel of sorts called Salt Sacrifice coming out later this year. But yeah, I think I was mixing them up with another studio because I thought they weren't American for a second, but I was wrong about that. I should say my impression really was negative, and then it switched to positive. I died a lot against the first couple of bosses, but then something clicked, and the game became much more fun and easy for me. But I was a little bit surprised at how less Metroidvania and more Souls this game was. Again, there's things like like the poise system. There's a poise stat, and it which determines how easy it is to knock you over.
Is that balance? Poise stat doesn't.
No, balance and poise are like poise is. I think balance is based on how unwieldy your weapon is, and poise is how easy or hard it is for you to be knocked over. And the two stats interact a little bit. And if the enemy has low poise and you have a weapon that's good at knocking back, you can really beat have enemies go flying. And it affects. I think it also affects your speed to a degree. So like the poise stat and also how poorly explained it is a characteristic of the Souls games. Like I've only heard of a poise stat in RPGs because of Souls, and seeing it here and knowing that this had Souls influence, like, oh, they are, if not straight ripping off, definitely directly importing some gameplay concepts from Souls. And let's get into the beginning of the game. At the very start, you're a sailor on a ship that's escorting a princess to a faraway land, and they have you design your own little cartoon character with a lot of options for things like facial features and hair color. But also, you choose a class which determines your starting equipment and your starting place on the skill tree. But you can find all of the equipment from every class throughout the game without that much difficulty. So if your starting class will definitely affect how you approach the first couple levels of the game, but by the end, I was wearing more chef armor than knight armor more chef armor than paladin armor by the end, even though I started out as a paladin.
It's more of a head start than anything.
Yes, it's a head start, but far from character defining. And then on the ship, you're raided by monsters from the deep. You fight a couple zombie-like things, and then you probably lose a battle against a giant sea monster. You can win that battle, and it gives you a special trophy. But I sure as hell didn't do that, or didn't manage that. And then and then you're shipwrecked on a mysterious island, and navigating the island to escape it is the whole gist to Salt Sanctuary. So
gotta find the princess.
Yeah, exactly. And spoiler alert, you don't find the princess, and I'm not even sure there ever was a princess. But starting with you, Jono, what was your starting class choice and your early impressions of, like, say, the ship in the first couple areas?
I started the game about, I don't know, a little over maybe 2 months ago, because we knew we were doing this a while ago. And I think I I was going for like a paladin, and I bounced off it hard. And then I shut it down for a little while, and then I went back into it. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go with a knight. Very basic, good old-fashioned knight, so I get like a baseline experience. So I created a knight and kind of went down that path. Very quickly discovering that heavy armor sucks. Heavy armor is not a great idea for this game, in my opinion, because it does not... rolling is, if you cannot roll quickly, you are probably going to die a lot more than you should. So having yourself weighed down, as I understand it, many players, more advanced players of the game, basically have their characters be completely naked, just like wearing a loincloth the entire game, just so they can increase their speed and their rolling and stuff like that. That's where I started, but that's not where I ended.
I almost did that. For parts of the game, I would go through the entire game only wearing the blacksmith gloves and nothing else, because the blacksmith gloves give you +3 strength, which is pretty good and are very lightweight. But I made a similar discovery to you. I tried to play the beginning of the game as a heavy armored warrior. I picked the paladin class, and they give you a shield, a mace, and heavy armor. But rolling and moving quickly is so valuable. And the heavier your armor is, the worse your roll is, and the slower you move, was awful. So for a while, I only wore blacksmith gloves, but then by the end game, I increased my endurance stat enough that I was able to equip some armor. So by the end of the game, I was wearing very, very light armor. It would be like blacksmith gloves, raptor boots, raptor chest piece, and my head would either be no equipment at all or the yokai mask, which I just thought looked cool. But that's an important realization. Like movement and dodging is very important in this game, and to accomplish that, you need armor that weighs less than 50% of your encumbrance stat, and encumbrance increases when you put points into endurance, your encumbrance increases, which I know is a lot of stats at once. So like, if it's between 25 and 50%, you have okay movement and a pretty good roll. And if it's under 25%, which is when I strip naked down to my blacksmith gloves, you have a very long, fast roll and very good movement. So I was able to keep my encumbrance at around 30% most of the time, but sometimes to get it under 25 by the end game, I would remove like my mask and boots just to get the best roll possible. And that was if I had a weapon that was on the light side. Some heavy weapons I had to go down to blacksmith gloves if I wanted a good roll at all. But that mantra that you said before is correct. Heavy armor sucks. Don't go for a heavy armor build like I did. Maybe just a weapon and shield is pretty good, because even though shields are very heavy, you can just block your way through the entire game if you have a good willpower stat and a good endurance stat. Willpower determines your stamina, and like every action in this game, from blocking to dodging to attacking, requires stamina. So having a ton of stamina and a good shield can get you through the game. Having a good weapon and a good nice dodge roll can get you through the game. But trying to do either of those with full heavy armor is an awful idea.
Yeah, agreed. This game is much more. I find that a lot of Metroidvanias with RPG elements, yeah, your stats matter, but they don't necessarily change the way you play the game. In this case, it is very much, it's a hardcore RPG. Like, you have to have character builds in mind, armor in mind, equipment in mind, that will directly affect your stats. And if you're not doing that, you're going to get totaled. But if you can manage your stats properly and, build up certain areas, and obviously while leveling up, selecting specific skills for the type of build that you want, that's how you're going to survive. So just trying to randomly level up constantly and not really paying attention to where you're putting your skill points, it's sure death.
Yeah, doing some pre-research into how you want to approach the game is very, very valuable.
Doing some pre-research anyway is a good idea for this game, because it doesn't tell you a damn thing.
Yeah, because going in, I decided I wanted to be like, I wanted a two-hand weapon when I wanted to deal damage, and switch to a shield if I needed to block, and I'll be a heavy armored knight. And that was just a horrible idea. What you should do is you should pick one of the 3 damage stats, which are strength, dexterity, and magic, and put a lot of points into that, whether you want to be, like a fast fighter, a big two-handed or shield fighter, or a mage. And then once you have your damage set, just put a bunch of points into endurance, willpower, and wisdom, so you have good encumbrance, good stamina recovery, and good magic and good focus recovery. Focus is like stamina but for spells. Or prayers. There's magic spells, which are, you throw out you throw out magic stuff to deal damage, and prayers are like magic, but they are more focused on the self, like self-strengthening or healing or things like that. And there's a starting classes that focus on magic and prayer, and the whole systems regarding to those. But Jono or Tina, guess how many spells and prayers I cast through the entire game?
0.
Correct.
If you're anything like me, yeah, 0.
I knew I wanted to be a warrior from the beginning. I did not cast a single spell or prayer. I put all of my points into strength, or I should say like almost an even. It was probably like 1/4 strength, 1/4 willpower, 50% endurance by the end. Because by the end, I cared only about getting my encumbrance down so I could roll better. And once I sort of figured out what I wanted to do, I did keep shields around in case I needed them, but I ended up not needing them. It was either if the enemy was weak against strike damage, I would hit him with a hammer. If the enemy was weak against slash damage, I would hit him with a sword or my giant scissors, and just switch between those two-handed warrior for the whole game. And it was pretty satisfying, but the process of figuring out that's what I wanted to do, and that was a decent choice, was a little bit rough. To give you, the game has, I think, about 25 bosses. I didn't fight all of them, but I fought most of them. Let's say I fought 20. I think I died probably 30 times against the first 5 bosses, and then only a couple times against the last 15, because it was a real moment for me figuring out how to play and what I wanted to do, and then the rest became so much easier. Because like going into the game, as Jono said, without much of a direction or an idea, or what exactly the stats do, could be a recipe for disaster if you try to put points into stats that don't fit your build or semi-randomly is just a bad idea. But again, it's not a great look that you recommend to read about a game before playing it. But I think the Assault and Sanctuary, and maybe a lot of other Souls-like games, do benefit from that. But Tina, what was your character build like and your ideas going in?
Okay, similar story. I just started with a generic fighter, thinking, okay, I'm going to wear all the heavy armor, use the big weapons. I didn't discover till maybe the third or fourth area how important it was to roll. So I wasn't doing that well against the bosses. After that point, my endurance was still pretty high. So I'm still wearing some of the heavy armor, but just enough that I could still do the normal roll. And I found that during the boss fights, I usually switch to all of the blacksmith stuff because it has such good fire protection.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
The blacksmith armor gives you +3 strength and good fire protection, and the chef armor gives you, I think, like one small stat bonus, and it gives you huge poison protection.
Yeah.
So like for some early bosses that had a lot of fire or a lot of poison, I would use those full sets. But by the end, it was what I said before, like blacksmith gloves, raptor body, and yokai mask.
Yeah, a couple things that I noticed about the character creation, though. They didn't explain what those bonus items do.
They hardly explain anything.
Yeah, like I still haven't used it. I think it was one of the crystal things to change the creed of a sanctuary or something like that. And I don't know if the country you choose to come from has any kind of impact on the game at all.
I don't think it does.
No.
I didn't notice a single. They meant there's lore around it. Like if you look at item descriptions, they'll mention things coming from specific countries, and some of the NPCs you meet, which aren't and there aren't a ton of them, mention even mention like lore about political struggles and wars between the different countries. But they give you like 12 countries to choose from at the beginning for your character origin, and I don't think it matters.
I think it just affects the color of your skin, maybe some.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not even. I remember I was part of the north part of the map, but I couldn't even name the country I was from. Maybe it made me a little bit paler. But you mentioned creeds and sanctuaries, Tina, and that is pretty important. Like sanctuaries are sort of these open safe rooms and save points that are scattered throughout the game. And creeds are one of, I think there's 7 or 8 religious orders that you can unlock, and you choose one at the beginning between 3 of the basic ones. But then you can find the other, I think 4 throughout the game. One of them, the Stone Roots, is really easy to find. The other 3 are hidden. And basically, picking a religion, you can change creeds without much difficulty. But if you do that, your old creed that you abandoned won't like you anymore, and you have to find the NPC in the wooded area south of the village of Smiles, and she can remove the sin from you, so your old creed won't hate you anymore. It's like, there's a lot of weird specific nonsense in this game. And by the end, I discovered that I really and each creed has different inventory in their shops, different spells that you can unlock, different healing items and boosting items that you get by leveling up the creed. You can level up the creed by doing quests from a creed leader or from someone that from a stone leader statue. And again, you find statues like a stone merchant, stone leader, stone guide, etc., to determine what merchants and what people are populating each sanctuary. And by the end of the game, I was really, really coveting stone leaders, stone blacksmiths, and stone guides, because again, guides help you facilitate fast travel, blacksmiths sell you equipment, and leaders give you salt bonuses in that zone and also let you upgrade the creed. So I was really saving those for sanctuaries I really liked.
It's a nice little base building mechanic that they've kind of worked into it too. How every sanctuary just kind of becomes its own base that you can customize with various NPCs.
Did either of you have a particular creed that you sort of settled with?
I was pretty much on the Stone Roots. I just like the acorn. It amused me.
I just stuck with I don't remember what it was called, the one with the candles.
The three.
Yeah, the 3 is one of them. Yeah, I think each of them has a starting item. I think the 3 is like a menorah. The Stone Roots is a stone acorn. The iron ones is a
just an orb.
Yeah, I think it's just like an iron sphere. And the one that I settled on by the end was the House of Splendor, and theirs is a golden mask.
Creepy looking golden mask too.
Yeah, it's a creepy golden mask. But the House of Splendor, their upgrade items, their boosting item is a bottle of wine that increases your strength and defense by 50%. So I was just swigging wine and swinging my giant warhammer for the entire second half of the game. I stuck with the House of Splendor. I know that there's one I didn't unlock called I think it's like the Order of Fire and Sky, and they sell you a bunch of really good lightning and fire spells based on the online research I did.
In my research, it's the Keepers of Fire and Sky, and then there's the Order of the Betrayer.
Yeah, I did unlock Order of the Betrayer. To unlock Order of the Betrayer, you have to basically desecrate a sanctuary of a different order by basically just by contaminating it with an item called I think it's called like a bloody page or a dark page or something, and you basically you have to ruin someone else's sanctuary in order to unlock the door to the Order of the Betrayer. And I know the Order of the Betrayer has a really good merchant and some good stuff, but I didn't switch creeds to them. I stuck with the I stuck with the House of Splendor to the end because I had already leveled them up to max, and I didn't want to start from scratch with a new order. But again, finding empty sanctuaries and deciding what creed goes there, and interacting with all the different creeds and upgrading your existing one, it's a neat mechanic. Like Jono said, it's basically base building. And that's also rewarded by exploration and finding those little stone idols that you can put up as offerings to decide what's in each sanctuary. And I would have to remember, oh yeah, this sanctuary is good because I have a merchant and an alchemist there, so I'll go there if I want to upgrade a weapon. But if I want to level up, or if I want to get more salt, I should go to this area because I have because I put one of the creed leaders there. Like little elements like that made the basic navigation of the game a little more interesting. But we've mentioned them a couple times that this game has pretty challenging boss fights, and it's sort of driven by boss fights, and almost basically every area, because the game is sort of segmented into zones or biomes, like a lot of games like this, has one or two bosses that are the major roadblocks. And not all of them are story required. There's I noticed commentary when I was looking up stuff about this game that there's ways to avoid even some of the earliest bosses, but mostly this game is exploring zones punctuated by boss fights. What did you guys think of the bosses in this game, and do you have a favorite or least favorite?
I think the bosses were probably my least favorite part of the game, just because they were too fast and hectic for me. And I found, with the potions, you drink them and then it takes a few seconds before you heal.
Oh yeah.
With regular enemies, I could just roll away somewhere and heal, but with bosses, it's like the window of being able to do that is a lot smaller, so they just like hit me and I'd lose. But yeah, like you really got to think of a strategy, find their patterns, and usually in games like this, I'm just used to being really aggressive. So it was very different for me.
Yeah. Focusing on evasion more than offense helps with almost every boss fight.
You really need to play the long game when you're attacking bosses in this game. If you just go in and like whack, 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 they're going to be dead. They're going to hit you, they're going to send you back, and that's going to be the end of it.
I think my favorite, that Inquisitor in the dome was pretty easy.
Oh yeah, he was the one that had the big chain scythes.
Yeah.
The ironically named Untouched Inquisitor.
Yeah, that one kind of surprised me, because before that, some of the bosses right before it were really hard, and this one was like, oh, that's it? Okay. I think my least favorite is, right now I'm stuck on the husk, whatever it is, in the cave.
Oh yeah, the disemboweled husk.
Yeah, he's just so fast, and that stupid fire attack, it like knocks me out in one hit. I also didn't really like the dragon.
Oh yeah, the I think the Kraken worm.
Yeah, the Kraken worm, he's called, in the castle. But I found that putting a blacksmith in that sanctuary, it really helped my strength against him. So yeah, I like the little bonuses you get from putting those statues in the sanctuaries.
Yeah, I mentioned before, I struggled mightily against the first 4 or 5 bosses.
The Sodden Knight is just for a first boss. Whew.
Yeah, especially if you have heavy armor and can't roll through him. Like my roll was slow and short, so I couldn't even roll from one side of the knight to the other. Mm-hmm. And I eventually beat him by mostly using shield tactics, which eventually worked, but I died against him a bunch of times. The boss that I struggled with the most was a couple after him, the Kraken Cyclops, which is similar to the Sodden Knight in that it's a human. It's very large and humanoid, and mostly has just big hits with a sword. But my roll wasn't good enough that I couldn't reliably get around the Cyclops. So I got probably a little lucky when I finally beat him. But right around the time of the Kraken Worm was when I'd figured out roll, hit, roll kind of strategies. And also that's when I started using the boosting item at the beginning. I think I was still with the iron ones at that point. Wait, no, I was with the stone. I was with the stone roots at that point, where I approached every boss fight. Okay, here's a boss. I'm going to use my boosting item, which again was golden wine for when I was with the House of Splendor. Uh, I'll use my boosting item that adds a bunch of element damage or a bunch of extra damage to my weapon. Then I'll go in, try to hit them once, immediately roll through them or roll away from them, then get another one or two hits in, then roll away, let my stamina recover, get back in there. The moment of realization was okay. The first thing was I needed to improve my dodge rolling and my encumbrance, and then approach. Now you're probably going to laugh at me because I talk about this series way too much already. I had to approach it like a Monster Hunter fight because Monster Hunter games, which I've been playing since 2008, have a long animation when you use a potion and have enemies that are always bigger and faster than you, and you have to find openings and roll around a lot. And so like me realizing, oh, okay, and when I need to heal, I need to roll away and play keep away while they're attacking somewhere else and to be allowed to use a potion. Like just going in with the idea of finding your openings and choosing your spots rather than go in swinging my giant hammer was very valuable to me. Like, again, first focusing on dodge rolling and encumbrance, then fighting bosses like Monster Hunter hunts.
Hmm.
And then like starting with the Kraken Worm, I think I killed 90% of the remaining bosses on the first attempt because of my Monster Hunter instincts kicking in more than my Mega Man instincts kicking in.
I thought the game was very interesting in the way the bosses were handled. It was really, really weird just how like, for example, the Sodden Knight was just a nightmare, but, I got through it. And I found the Queen of Smiles to be really easy. It took me like 2 or 3 times, and I got through her. And then Cyclops was very tricky. Mad Alchemist was super tricky. False Jester I beat like instantly. I don't know how it only took me 1 try. I was like, that was it. My favorite boss in the game was that I got to was the Tree of Men. I liked the Tree of Men. I thought it was a nice change up from the usual dodge roll, dodge roll, dodge roll. With the platforms and things like that. I had fun. I actually genuinely had some fun playing that boss. In fact, the Red Hall of Cages was probably my favorite area in the game.
God, the Red Hall of Cages had the basically a giant torture chamber. I didn't like how vertical the Red Hall of Cages was. I died from
fall damage.
Yeah, from fall damage from bad platforming at least twice. I don't know. But then the Tree of Men was a pretty cool boss. Again, like a giant torture device with undead corpses hanging from it, and you have to kill the corpses on the hanging bodies on either side of it in order to expose its head, and then you can go for the head. It was it was almost like a Zelda fight that had puzzle elements to it than most of the other bosses.
Yeah, it felt pretty different from the other bosses. I like that one too.
I'm on the same page as Tina about the disemboweled husk. The disemboweled husk broke me. Seriously, broke me. That was the moment where I was like, nope, I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. Usually, we'll get into our takeaways from the game later, but I think that the point of a very, very hard game and very hard bosses like this, for example, is catharsis. You're supposed to be hitting the boss and like bouncing off the boss really, really hard. And then you learn the pattern slowly and surely, and you get some luck and you get it down to a little bit. And then finally you beat that boss that you may have been stuck on for a while. And you should feel a moment of catharsis. You should feel a moment of, I did it, or something celebratory. When I finally beat the disembodied husk, I was just dreading continuing to the next boss. It had the exact opposite feeling that it probably should have. Not the least of which is Hager's Cavern is a nightmare. The area where you meet the disembodied husk, and has some of the most annoying little enemies you could possibly imagine, including those skeletons.
The disappearing teleporting skeletons were really annoying. The ones that bugged me the most were there's a version of them in the sunken fortress where the Kraken Cyclops is, but then there's harder versions of them later where the ones that look kind of like alien xenomorphs.
Yeah, the ones who come down like the pillars.
Yeah, but they come down from the pillars or like sort of emerge from the background, and they're really hard to see until they're already attacking you. So I got ambushed by them. Again, this is in an area later in the game called the it's something ziggurat. You know what I mean, Tina?
Those little kids in there. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, in the basement half of the ziggurat, there's more.
Yeah, I got ambushed too.
Yeah, you would get ambushed then because the lighting is a little poor, and they emerge from the background and are colored similarly from the background.
Yeah.
It's a little too easy to be surprised and killed in 4 hits by regular enemies, or to get knocked out of a jump and then die from long fall damage. I died more from long fall damage than from bosses overall in this game. Again, like in the second half, I'd figured out dodge rolling well enough to kill a lot of bosses in the first try. I think it took me more than one try to kill the disemboweled husk, but he does have a tell before he fires his gun that does the long range fire attack. So I would just roll right when the gun was lighting up, and then I could get to the other side of him, whack him a couple times because he is slow to turn around, and then beat him that way. But I did think the platforming and the enemies leading up to the disemboweled husk were a little harder than he was.
Also, trying to get to the disemboweled husk was the most important part of that, because there are only two sanctuaries. They're not even sanctuaries. They're like the mini sanctuaries.
Oh yeah, the shrines where you just have which is just a room with candles in it and no NPCs.
Yeah, there are 2 of them, and every single time you die to this thing, you have to go on like this little walk of shame back to him, with some of the most annoying enemies, including some of those skeletons. I eventually realized that there was a minor shortcut with the sanctuary to the far right on the map. If you did a long jump off the edge of that, you could land and just it was a straight shot straight onto the disemboweled husk. But then again, you have to face off with, I think, one of those big I don't even know what they were called.
Those guys that crawl and they look like pyramid heads.
Yeah, I remember that because I one of them, those enemies drop an uncommon item that I needed later in the game called an endless skull. So I farmed skulls from those guys for part of the way in the second half of the game because it was an upgrade item for one of the weapons I used the most.
Yeah, but that walk of shame was another one of the reasons why the disemboweled husk broke me. Just because every single time I lost to that stupid monster, I had to do this stupid walk that was not easy back to him again. And even worse, enemies can follow you into boss battles. So if I consciously didn't wipe out the screaming girls, there were 2 of them just before the boss battle. And if I even caught the sight of one of them would follow me into the boss battle, and I wouldn't realize it until like midway through the boss battle when all of a sudden I'm like, oh, and now I have to dodge her stuff as well. That's just great.
Yeah, that was one of my least favorite areas too. I still didn't finish it. I went to the dome instead because you do some stuff through there instead.
I remember another thing. I was what weapons were you using on the disemboweled husk?
At that point, I was using an upgraded shredded bulwark.
What kind of weapon is that? I'm not sure I used it.
It's a great sword.
Okay, all right. So you didn't run into the problem I did. The disemboweled husk is like 10 times stronger against strike damage than slash damage. So I think the first time I died against him, I barely did any damage using my warhammer that I've been using for ever since I found it. But then when I unlocked my great scissors in that very area, I managed to change my kuremoa, which is definitely a Japanese transliteration of claymore. When I upgraded my claymore to a great scissor, he's slash damage does way more against him. I killed him pretty quickly in just a couple of hits with the great scissors. But again with my vibe for the entire middle third and final third of the game was switch between a strike weapon and a slash weapon, and eventually I found my favorite weapon in the game, the Castaway's Great Adze, which is half strike, half slash, which I would use. I would always use which it's an anchor. I would use the Castaway anchor, basically for all regular enemies, but then for a boss, I would figure out whether it was weak against strike or slash and equip a weapon to fit that. But again, it's just figuring out the tells and getting really good at dodging will get through everything in this game. And I've heard that the easiest build in the game is actually a magic one, because finding the right spell allows you to play a long range game to kill everything at range. The boss I had the most trouble with by far is in the second half of the game. She I forget the name of the area she's in, but it's a lake something like it's like Lake Sylvan or
Siam Lake.
Siam, that's it.
Siam. Oh, that's an I. Yes, that's not a
Siam Lake. That was it. And the boss is called the Witch of the Lake, and she has one move where she slaps you, and it does not deal much damage, but it knocks you away. And then she has 3 or 4 moves that are basically long range spells that hit you multiple times. Like like one's like she shoots like 10 dark arcane spears at you, and then one where she does like 20 little lightning sparks all at you at once. And she would kill me in one hit, no matter what armor I had on, with like one slap away, comboed into a shotgun of lightning bolts and kill me instantly. It was infuriating. And again, because I was fighting a close range kind of character, I was always trying to get near her, attack and roll, but then she could slap me away and then kill me in one spell. It was awful. And right when I hadn't hit a breaking point yet, but right when I was getting really frustrated, I did an attempt with her where she just didn't slap me and instead slowly cast spells, and I could get behind her and attack her over and over, and I won. It felt like it was more dumb luck than strategy when I finally took her down. But again, the boss strategies in this game, I think it helps to be a little flexible. If you try to fight every boss the same way, it will make it much harder on yourself. But because I always had a slash weapon and a strike weapon in reserve, and that made a lot of bosses way easier. And I also kept a shield in case I wanted to deal with that anymore. But I didn't really use a shield in the second half of the game. Like having flexibility, like I'll use my sword this time, or my mace another time, or I'll use a shield against this boss, or a 2-handed weapon against this boss. Having a little bit of build flexibility helps a lot, I think, because I was switching weapons all the time in the second half of the game when I found a couple weapons I liked.
Can I hate on the disemboweled husk a little bit more?
But please, sure.
The left-hand side of the screen has scenery in the foreground. So if you get on the left-hand side of that screen, you are hidden and the boss is hidden. So it was real hard to see yourself or the boss. You got to basically, that whole battle, you have to keep to the right hand of the screen.
I rolled through him to the left hand of the screen, but then when he turned around, I would just roll through him again.
You could be over there, but you're not going to be able to see yourself or him.
I was able to see him. Maybe I had a different angle of the screen than him, because like there is, when I rolled through him to the left side of the screen, I did my character was definitely obscured, but I could still see him.
Yeah, this game is. There's another thing about this game, which is the visual aspect of it. Like, I would argue that it has extraordinarily strong visual design. Like, it might not be to everyone's taste, but they knew what they wanted out of this game, and they went for it hard. And they created a very unique aesthetic, which suits it. You better hope that you have decent eyesight and that your monitor has HDR. Because the contrast against the light and the dark and the gray, it's a very brown grayish game.
It's dimly lit. That is definitely true.
Yeah, and not just because of the you occasionally need a torch in dark areas.
Oh yeah, equipping a torch, especially, and some skills only activate when you wield a torch.
Yeah,
and if your weapon skill isn't high enough, if you try to equip a 2-handed weapon in one hand, sometimes it'll encumber you like incredibly if you try to attack. Like there's a whole thing like if your sword skill is 4, then you can equip level 4 great swords, but only a level 3 great sword in one hand. So like it happened to me at least once. I had a level 5 axe, and my axe skill was level 5, but when I would open up a torch, which means I had the axe in one hand, and that means whenever I tried to attack with the axe while I was holding a torch, it would be laboriously slow, and an enemy would attack me. But that's not really the point we're making here. The game is dimly lit, very dark, a lot of grays and browns and washed out colors. I mentioned earlier that some enemies emerge from the background and are very, very hard to see unless you're sort of expecting them, or can detect their movement even though the colors are a little washed out. It makes the game harder, and the game is very bleak. Like the game is not a little nihilist, but also just a little defeatist. And the enemy designs, especially the bosses, are just dark and sometimes grotesque. That you got to be prepared for a little bit of gore and horror. And it's cool that your weapon gets covered with blood as you kill more enemies, but that's like one of the tamer visual choices in the game.
It's again, it's a visual choice, and it's part of the aesthetic that they were going for. And I would argue that it is very effective at creating this island of pointlessness, this island of just death and nihilism. Not to my taste, but I get it.
And the pointlessness and nihilism is expressed by a lot of the NPCs you meet. There aren't very many of these NPCs. Again, probably less than 10 that have consequential dialogue. A couple of them give you a brand that lets you do the air dash or one of the torch spells.
Wall jump, yeah.
Wall jump is one of them. But all of them are sort of like are part of this bleakness. One of them is a thief that was trying to steal something. She was accompanying a merchant on the island. She decided to look for the treasure in the island. When she realized that this island might be inescapable and doesn't have the treasure she was looking for, she decides to try and leave, but she doesn't know if she'll succeed. There's a character that's a knight who's looking for a quest, and every time you meet him, he recognizes scenery and he doesn't really understand why. Because he recognizes the Dome of the Forgotten and and Hagar's Cavern, I think, but he's like, that's weird. The pirate Hagar lived hundreds of years ago, and the Forgotten Dome is from thousands of years ago. Why are they both on the island? And he's basically on the island looking for adventure or someone or something to do. But when he eventually finds a dead end, and he decided, you know what, I've given up. Here's an item. I'm just gonna wait here for the rest of my days. And later in the game, maybe you didn't get to him, Jono, because this is pretty late. You meet a sorcerer who says that he's like, I'm trying to go through the depths of this island, but every time I die, I wake up again, and by now I'm not sure how many times I've died and how many times I've waken up, and I'm close to ready to give up. And he makes the observation that he thinks all of the undead on the island are people that eventually did give up and didn't have any salt. Because again, like everything from leveling up to upgrading weapons is governed by salt. Enemies drop salt all the time, so it's easy to get a lot of salt quickly. And salt is the resource you recover when you die and reclaim your lost salt from the enemy that killed you. What's the most amount of salt you lost at once? I'm curious.
Right after I beat the disemboweled husk, which also is one of the reasons that broke me, fall damage, and then I died getting back to it, and I lost I think it was 50,000.
That's quite a bit. My amount, the most amount I ever lost was also right around there. It was probably around 45,000, and it also was right after a boss. I thought I would be able to get to a sanctuary soon after the boss, but no, there was a new area. I died to probably fall damage, but then couldn't reclaim it in time. Lost 45,000 salt. A similar situation to that, but eventually, I found a regular enemy later in the game that also dropped an item that I needed that would give me about 7,000 salt per kill. So eventually you can get a lot of salt at once, but it is pretty frustrating to lose a ton of salt. And it happened to me a couple times, but none more memorably than that 45k.
I think the most I've ever lost was around 14,000 in the dome because of a long fall. Because usually when I get to a point where I can reach another level, I just teleport right back to the sanctuary. So I'm usually able to hold on to a lot of the salt. But normally right after a boss, I just teleport back.
I started almost compulsively teleporting back after getting a large amount of salt after I lost it that one time. I'm struggling to remember where it was. I think it might have been the dome, but I don't exactly remember because again we're recording this in mid-March, but I beat the game sort of earlier than I thought I would.
Because I didn't complete the game. I just watched a playthrough on YouTube, so I would be familiar with everything that we were talking about and later areas and things like that. And some of the later areas were, made me not regret quitting. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, geez, the second half of the Ziggurat and the area called the Pitchwoods, which has some really challenging disappearing platform stuff. It's reminding me of Heatman stage in Mega Man 2.
Mm-hmm. Even the earlier stages, the stupid the watching woods.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
The platforming.
The platforming there, and in the area, I think it's called the is it the Stench Mire or something?
The Mire of Stench, yeah.
Yeah. The platforming in there and the woods got really hairy sometimes. I think the Pitch Woods, which is, I'm pretty sure is an optional area, had it the worst.
That was my breaking point. The Mire of Stench. I got through the Mire of Stench. I beat the disemboweled husk, but that was the moment where I was like, I'm done. But I was keeping playing because we're playing it for the podcast. And I got to the Mire of Stench, and I got through most of the Mire of Stench, and then I got to just before the boss where you have to do some wall jumps there, and there is a platform in the middle of one of the wall jump sections, and I just wasn't paying attention and stood on the platform, and the platform fell, and I fell, and I died.
Oh yeah, one of the crumbling platforms. Yeah.
Yeah, the crumbling platforms, and that was the moment where I was just like, I don't think I'm doing this anymore. But that was the Mire of Stench platforming in there is, it's tough.
The boss of the the Mire of Stench isn't bad.
It's Stench most foul.
Yeah, it does a lot of poison damage, but if you have some poison and it's really slow. I thought the disemboweled husk was way harder than the Stench most foul.
Yeah, the bosses I feel are balanced differently for different classes, probably. Like, for example, I mentioned, like, I plowed through the False Jester. I don't know what it would have been like if I was another class, but there's a chance that the False Jester might actually be really challenging to, like, a magic class, for example. I don't know.
I'm just curious now, is there platforming in the Souls games, in the Dark Souls games?
Some, I think.
Maybe a little bit. Not there's definitely long fall damage, but it's less platforming and more like you're going up a bridge or a staircase at the side of a tower, and an enemy that has a lot of that if your poise is low, an enemy blow can knock you off the staircase kind of thing. It's less precision platforming and more sort of adventure environmental stuff.
Yeah, the platforming in this got me a little worried, though I haven't even gotten to the Mire area yet. I didn't like that stupid elevator in the Red Hall of Cages because it was so fast and I missed it every time.
Or when you're running towards the elevator shaft and you're not paying attention and you just go through a door and then fall down the elevator shaft because there's no ledge.
Yep.
Or you do a bit of a long drop and you land and you still survive, but you're maybe down to a quarter health. And then one step later, you step on a trap, and one of those swinging battering rams kills you.
Oh yeah,
but you can see the switches where the swinging battering rams are.
Yeah.
But I usually got hit by one first before ever managing to avoid one again, because again the game is so dimly lit that it's hard to see things like environmental switches.
It looks like there's a lot of junk on the ground in some of those indoor areas.
Yeah,
and also I feel like each area very, very similar to the bosses. You're expected to learn. You're expected to learn the area and learn, oh, there's a trap there, and it's basically get muscle memory. So you're not even looking for the trap; you just know it's there, so you jump over it. I did, like in some places I did, and there are other places that you can use traps to your advantage, like at the very beginning of the Village of Smiles, where there's that trap which I got hit by the very first time, but you can use it to kill the knight right past it.
It's a game of learning and information, which is also attributed to all of the Souls games very heavily. But if you feel like you can't make it past an obstacle, the game is so bleak and so unforgiving that you really do feel despair if you're hitting a breaking point or close to a breaking point. I never hit that breaking point. I was frustrated a lot, but then I would do something like look up a boss and realize that it's much weaker against slash damage, and then approach it slightly differently and would win. And eventually my two-handed hammer and scissors build was dealing so much damage at times that I killed a lot of bosses in the second half of the game on the first attempt, just by again use your boost item at the beginning, look at their attack patterns, roll through them, get one hit in a roll through. If your stamina is low, run away a little bit. And I mostly got through the game pretty well. I beat the last boss on the first attempt, but the boss right before it, or maybe two bosses before it, the one the one that looks like a giant Cthulhu, who I forget.
Or Krakoan Dragon Skuza?
Maybe. That sounds right. I think I died against that one. Now. Yeah, I definitely didn't kill that one on the first try, but I killed the Nameless God at the end of the first try. Oh, again, the Nameless... Let's go into the story a little bit. Eventually, by talking to these NPCs, and also a scarecrow that's taunting you and saying very threatening, ominous things to you, you realize that you're not really on an island. Where you are is a bizarre sanctuary at the bottom of the ocean, which is that is run by a god called the Nameless God. And the god sort of embodies all of the sea monsters and superstitions of the deep that sailors in the past attributed to sea monsters or krakens, which is why a lot of enemies have the kraken name in them. And the Nameless God steals ships and populates its sanctuary with shipwrecked sailors. And also, if certain parts of the world have become lost or forgotten, he will steal them and like stitch them into his patchwork of environments, which is why things like the dome and the ziggurat and Hagar's cavern being known to history and not near each other in history, but somehow stolen and brought together in the Nameless God's domain. And basically, when you kill the Nameless God, if you've talked to the Scarecrow throughout the game, you can either become the new Nameless God and rule over the island, or or if you didn't do that, or if you choose not to steal the Nameless God's powers, you can finally resurface and get back and escape the island. So the two endings are rule over the island or escape the island. But the as a concept, it's really cool. But you barely get any of that story unless you seek out every NPC and read a lot of item and skill descriptions. Like the Hagar's Cavern and the Disemboweled Husk is about an ancient pirate named Captain Hagar, who was eventually betrayed by his own men for hoarding treasure against them. And after his stomach was cut and was left to die, a haunted doll that was among the treasure he surrounded himself with crawled into Hagar's body and has been manipulating him as a hollowed out puppet from within. And if you're fighting the Disemboweled Husk, you might not notice the tiny figure in the middle of its stomach because you're desperate to avoid its cannon attacks. But I think what you have to do is you have to alchemize a weapon or armor after him, and then look at the description of the weapon and read his bestiary description to realize about the whole story of Captain Hagar. And that's where a lot of the lore is buried in this game. And a lot of it's cool. And the story ideas are cool. The character interactions are cool. There's just not a lot of them, and you really have to dig down to find all of them. So if you're someone who really values dialogue or story, and you're running into gameplay walls like Jono famously did at the Disemboweled Husk, this game can seem just completely bleak and empty. There's not a lot of story hooks and not a lot of gameplay hooks, sort of until you enjoy the gameplay and exploration enough to keep going. And I did get there partially, but even though I didn't love this game, I liked a lot of what it was doing, and eventually did just like swinging around my giant anchor and killing a lot of things. But I think I really needed to do some side research and make gameplay decisions informed by that side research in order to get there. And this is a unforgiving, bleak game that makes me not sure if I want to play every Souls game or never play another one again.
So I actually really like the lore and the aesthetic, but yeah, I agree. I didn't really like that it was hidden in the notes and the skill trees and stuff like that. I wish they integrated it better into exploration.
Like a Castlevania game gives me cutscenes.
Yeah.
And has a lot of forward momentum with the story. And it has a cool map and cool boss fights, but there are way more story hooks in a Castlevania game, or even most of the Metroid games, than in Salt Sanctuary. And I think I would like this game a lot more if A, they gave you a world map, B, they made the story a little bit more on the surface and less buried, and thirdly, just maybe explain some of its own stats and mechanics a little better. And also if they made it easier to undo skill points, because you can undo skill points by finding items called gray pearls, but they're very uncommon items. Like if someone stumbles into a bad build, it's probably easier to restart the game than to undo your skill points. And I wish they had made undoing skill points easier.
Yeah, and I mean, I was about to say the nice thing, but that's not quite true. About this game is if you know what you're doing and you know the boss patterns, it's not really that long a game. You can restart it. In fact, I think the game is designed for replayability because it's so challenging, because it's so hard, and learning the boss patterns and things like that. Restarting the game with a new game plus, or trying out a new class, or trying out a new set of abilities and weapons, is, I imagine, part of the appeal of this game, is coming back and trying new things.
I played through the game without using a single prayer or magic spell, and I think replaying the game as a mage class or as a cleric class is at least interesting.
You get a very different experience.
Yeah, that's true. Largely, I enjoyed this game. Largely, Jono did not enjoy this game, and Tina, but without putting words in your mouth, I think you probably fall in between Jono and I.
Yeah, like I enjoyed it, though I'm not very good at it, but I still want to keep at it. Like I enjoyed it enough that I want to still keep playing.
Would rather have a molar extracted than have to play this game more.
And the game's not brutally long. My final playtime was 19 hours, and I did a tiny bit of grinding to finish upgrading my anchor and my hammer. And I probably was slightly over leveled. I was exactly level 100 when I beat the game, and I don't think there's a limit to how much you can level. It's just it costs more salt every time.
Yeah, I think it's about 500 something.
Oh geez, yeah. I when I got to level 100, I was able to get my endurance high enough that my encumbrance was right at 25%. I'm like, this is probably fine for now. I'll spend the rest of my salt trying to get weird weapons. But. Actually, I didn't upgrade this weapon very much, but my favorite boss fight weapon combination was one of the bosses in the ruined temple is called the Coveted, and it's a giant stone axe, and then there's two ghosts, and one ghost grabs the axe and attacks you, while the other ghost shoots fireballs at you. And the target is the axe, not the ghost. You have to attack the axe, and when the health bar gets a little bit further down, one ghost gets knocked away, and the other ghost grabs the axe. And it's like the two ghosts are sort of fighting over the axe and trying to kill you, the intruder, with it. and when you defeat it, you get an item called the Coveted Ashes, and you can use the Coveted Ashes and alchemize it with another axe to wield the very axe that you just defeated in battle. Like that kind of interaction is great to me. Like an interesting boss fight design that gives you a reward that increases, that sort of deepens the lore of the game, and is like and also it's a really strong axe that you can equip. But I just didn't upgrade it all the way. I like interactions like that. I really liked and made me want to play more of this game. But by the end, I was basically just sort of ready to beat it, because again it has weird frustrations in any enemy design and no world map that I don't think I want to replay this game, but I mostly enjoyed it, and I bought the Dark Souls collection a week or two ago to reflect that, and now I'm worried if I'm gonna fall into a Dark Souls hole in 2022.
Oh, you know what was one thing I really didn't like? You couldn't pause the game. So if I needed to leave for any reason, or there was a phone call or something, I had to find a safe area and hope it was actually safe and something wouldn't crawl out at me.
Yeah, you had to go back to a sanctuary. Use one of those return bells to get back to a sanctuary, because there is a menu that where you use items and change armor and stuff, but that doesn't stop the action around you.
No.
It's funny that you said that about you buying the 3 Dark Souls games after you completed this, because after I finished playing, actually, my backlog list was 3 games shorter. So,
oh no!
I have a free copy of Bloodborne through PS Plus, and I was given Demon Souls as a gift last year. But playing this game made me just search around for a little bit, and I found the collection of Dark Souls 1, 2, 3 on sale for $35. I'm like, all right,
that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I'll pick that up just in case I want to try these later. So I have a lot of Souls in front of me, and Elden Ring's made a giant splash, so that makes me interested in that as well, of course. But I realize that Dark Souls is like Castlevania ideas with Monster Hunter boss fights. Maybe I might like this. When I'd resisted playing them for let's say right around a decade, despite a lot of chirping from Rob Steinman, among others. But all three of us reacted very differently to this game. Jono wants nothing to do with Souls. I am considering starting a new Souls career, and Tina's still plugging away at Salt Sanctuary. Like Salt and Sacrifice, this game's sequel is coming soon. What ideas do we have for it to maybe improve upon this experience, other than adding a world map? Because I think that's a given.
Keep it as far away from me as humanly possible.
Something I noticed about it looks like they really changed the graphic style for the sequel. Like, it looks more colorful, and I don't know if that would maybe help the contrast. I don't know if you've seen the trailers yet.
I've seen some images. I haven't really watched a trailer, but if it makes details and enemies more discernible, then I think that would be a major improvement. That sounds good.
Yeah, like it doesn't look quite as bleak and like gray, and I kind of did like that, but maybe it would help in other ways. That
sounds like a great change to me. The other one, I already mentioned this, but if they made undoing choices in the skill tree a little easier, I think that would be really helpful, because I didn't have to do that a lot, but again, I didn't realize exactly the build I wanted until partway through the game, and if I could make adjustments like that to make it a little bit easier on myself, I wish that was possible. But mostly I want that world map. I can be a serial map checker sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
again, every time I play a Yakuza or Judgment game, I am checking that map for where I'm supposed to go next all the time. Like, I want, and again, I'm literally a map making professional who with a career in GIS. So I like me a digital map now and then. So yeah, maps, color contrast, maybe keeping this game as far as humanly possible away from Jonathan Logan. Those are all improvements that we recommend for Salt and Sacrifice. And Jono, I will be gifting you a copy of it on Steam in the next calendar year.
Oh, thank you. That is
you're welcome.
That is going to be very much appreciated. I will immediately hide it and pretend it's not there.
I am a generous spirit, if nothing else.
Yeah, I got to be honest. The idea of not playing Souls-like, I do still want to play Dark Souls. And Elden Ring just looks irresistible almost based on the amount of the rave reviews it's been getting. And it's not... We'll get into this in a second. I don't know if it's Souls. I think it might just be this game, because I like tough as nails platformers, especially tough as nails Metroidvanias. I adore Hollow Knight. Which has, again, many Souls-like conventions, including the when you die, you have to go back to where you died and fight like a little version of yourself to get back all of your stuff. Tough as nails bosses, like oh gosh, what's the name of the game?
Quick interjection: I have not played Hollow Knight, although many people have recommended it to me. Does it have a map?
The map system is really, really interesting, because at first, there's no map. You have to find a cartographer on in each area who is mapping out the nest, and then he only gives you a partially completed map. And then your map isn't auto-completed as you travel. You need to go to a save point, and then when you sit down at a save point, your main character jots down the notes that he has taken on the map. So that's kind of how you get it. So it's a map, but it's not super detailed like it is in a classic Metroidvania. So it's kind of like a happy compromise between this and the map system.
Oh, I don't mind that at all. As long as there is a button I can press that shows me a partial map that can grow as I explore, that is something I want.
It does have a map system, and sorry, I'm still trying to remember that bloody game. It's Rogue Legacy.
Oh yeah,
Rogue Legacy has like tough as nail bosses that you have to learn patterns. So again, it's not that. I think it might just be this game. There was something about this game that had a dramatic effect on my mental health, which I don't think any game. I can't remember another game ever having this level of an impact on how I felt in a negative way, which is why I had to stop playing it. I didn't stop playing it because I was stuck, because I wasn't. I didn't stop playing it because I was I was not having I wasn't having a great time, but that's not it. The reason why is because after every single time I would play this game, I had an involuntary thought, and I mean, you're going to need a thing. It was this game. And it almost became like a mantra in the back of my brain that would just like trigger every time I died or fell or something. It was the opposite of enjoyment. And I think I've done a lot of thinking over the last couple of weeks as to why. And I don't really have an answer as to why. But there's something about the overall aesthetic, the darkness of it, the sense of hopelessness that is pervasive in this world. The constantly dying. There was something about it that genuinely was wearing away at how I felt. And eventually it just became a choice of, do I want to keep pushing through and making myself feel worse and worse, or do I want to stop and hopefully feel better in a few days? And that's the choice I made. I've never actually stopped playing a game before because of my mental health. But like Amanda, my partner, was literally like, you need to stop playing this game. I've never seen you like this. You need to stop. And eventually I just listened to her. So yeah, I hated this game. I hated everything about it. And that's not to say that I don't feel strongly that there are not redeeming factors about this game, because there are so many. Because as much as I hate the art style, I'm looking at it's like you go to an art gallery and you see a work of art and your immediate response is, ugh, I hate that. But that's not saying that it's a bad work of art. That's just saying that it's you've had an emotional response to a piece of art, and it might not be positive. And in my case, yeah, this is a piece of art, and it is not for me in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I hope this isn't too broad a comment, but I think that art, what is art? An art is something that is designed to make you think something or feel something.
Mhm.
And Salt and Sanctuary is a downer of a game. The designs are deliberately grotesque or maybe even repulsive. The tone of the game is bleak and maybe even depressing, and the gameplay choices that the player makes and the probably very very recurring deaths that the player experiences can be incredibly demoralizing. And I think maybe I mean, Jono, you and I are different people. That's a big comment, I know, and it might be because I'm very achievement oriented and wanted to finish this game, and I don't make as many emotional connections to games as a lot of other people do, and I know that's true of me compared to just a few of my friends that I've talked about games a lot with. I was probably less affected by the dark parts of this game and more motivated to just finish the damn thing than you were. I don't mean that as a disparaging comment.
Oh, it's not. But I don't know if I don't know if I agree with you, because let's take another game series that you and I both adore on every level, Yakuza. I am the kind of person that I've beaten every Amon fight in every single Yakuza, and that is grinding your teeth levels of Dark Souls, Salt and Sanctuary-esque, just unfair bosses, but like intentionally unfair bosses. And it's super, super hard. And I do that because I get that sense of achievement out of those games. There's just something about this one. I don't know.
Again, you and I are different people. I've beaten one Amon fight. It probably doesn't even count because it was Haruka's Amon fight. But yeah, exactly.
That was a throwdown, though. That was a throwdown.
It's pretty good. But I also really like rhythm games. So like I don't think I ever lost a single Haruka battle in the entirety of Yakuza 5.
God, I want an entire game of that. But anyway,
right, I wouldn't mind it. But anyway, for a Yakuza game, I never ever get close to 100% completion. I get to like 60% completion. I beat the game, and then I'm ready to move on to the next one. Again, we're built differently. But Salt and Sanctuary is bleak and depressing and gross and unforgiving and a lot of things that are definitely turnoffs to a lot of people. I didn't always like it, but I thought it at least was fun and cool sometimes.
Yeah.
And that makes me and with the idea that, oh, this is a not bad but slightly inferior replication of what makes Dark Souls great, made me more interested in Dark Souls because again the combining factors of me mostly liking Salt and Sanctuary and feeling its connections to Castlevania and Monster Hunter made me like, oh, geez, maybe I should play a Dark Souls game. And I truly think that this game, I'm not going to replay Salt and Sanctuary, but I think I will officially join the Souls world later this year. That is the end result of this. I'm eventually going to become one of those Souls jerks on Twitter that just tells you to get good.
I think I kind of feel the same. I have a copy of Bloodborne that someone gave me for my birthday like a decade ago.
All right. Yeah.
I have, I think the first Dark Souls on Steam. I haven't touched them because I was so afraid that, I wouldn't even last 10 minutes, but I kind of really want to now.
Yeah, again, now that we have an idea of what the pace of one of those is, and then it's about overcoming and not just about losing, that makes me more interested in those games. And then now that I've felt one for myself, even though and if a real Dark Souls game is better than this fake Dark Souls game, I'm more that makes me more interested in trying it. But if we're talking about what is art and what is a real Souls game, it might be time to end the episode.
That is probably an episode of Retro Encounter.
Yeah, I think it is. But listeners, thank you so much to listen to us sharing our suffering through Salt and Sanctuary. That each of us experienced very differently, but ultimately enough to at least have a good discussion about it. Again, I think I am the most likely of the three of us to pre-order Salt and Sacrifice, and Jono is the least likely. But that doesn't mean any of us are right or wrong about these feelings. This is one of our more divisive discussions we've ever had on Retro Encounter. But but I hope, listener, you are at least somewhat intrigued or entertained. And thank you so much, Tina and Jono, for sharing, for agreeing to play this game. Even though I feel like I have to apologize to Jono a little bit for indirectly making you play this game.
I'll tell you, talking about this game was a very enjoyable experience.
Yeah, even if we lost hours of our lives and felt mental and emotional pain from playing this game, at least we had a discussion out.
You want to know what? I went on, when I was in my mid-20s with my then partner, I went on the worst camping trip I've ever gone on. It was a nightmare. Everything went wrong. We were in the middle of a swamp. I knocked my shoulder out. I had to we were still rowing the canoe and everything. It was a nightmare. And I love telling stories about that trip to this day. Totally worth it. So maybe this will end up being that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe Salt Sanctuary is an ex that you're glad you finally broke up with. But listeners, we are somewhat thrilled to be done with Salt Sanctuary, but let's talk about the future of Retro Encounter. And maybe this isn't exactly what you're expecting right now, because normally this is the part of the podcast where I talk about the next game we're playing, and with the next 2 or 3 episodes will be like, but that's not exactly going to happen. This will be the last episode of Retro Encounter for maybe at least a few months. For the first time since 2015, and when we started this episode, we are going on a hiatus. I am feeling a lot of burnout from running a weekly podcast that is not my real job for 5 years and contributing for an additional 2 years before that. And I think I want a break. So I am going to be taking a leave of absence from RPG Fan and Retro Encounter for, I don't know exactly how long. My guess is 2 months, but I don't hold me to that, please. So this is not the end of Retro Encounter, but this is Retro Encounter's first long break in a long time. And Jono, you officially have my permission to, if you want to record a Retro Encounter episode that doesn't fit perfectly with Random Encounter or Rhythm Encounter, you feel free to do so. Send me a text about it or something.
It's going to be nothing but Star Trek episodes, Mike.
You know what? I'm not against it. As long as I am allowed to take a break and not record or edit episodes for a little while. But I will still be around. Listeners, you can find me on social media at the usual places. I'm not disappearing off the face of the earth. I am just stepping away from Retro Encounter for a little bit for mental and emotional health reasons. Similar to how Jono is permanently stepping away from Salt Sanctuary. But the Final Fantasy 13 episodes that we teased a while ago will happen eventually, but not in April like we first promised. I don't know exactly when we will do those, but Final Fantasy 13 will happen later in Retro Encounter. The game we were planning on doing after FF13 was Suikoden 1. And I can also promise that will happen later this year, but I don't know when. So please look forward to Final Fantasy 13 and Suikoden 1 episodes of Retro Encounter after we take a bit of a break. But I will still check the email for Retro Encounter. You can email us at retro@rpgfan.com if you have any questions about the podcast or well wishes for me to, step away from the podcast so I can finally play Judgment and Hollow Knight is the part of the short-term goals there. You can also comment on rpgfan.com's message boards, visit our Facebook page, check out our Discord, our YouTube, our Twitch, or any of those places. We are RPG Fan or RPG Fan.com. RPG Fan is the home to 3 other fabulous podcasts, starting with Random Encounter every 2 weeks, hosted by you, Jono.
Yep, we just did a Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster episode, and that was a blast talking about, those games, because who doesn't love talking about Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6?
Oh yeah, that was a very positively toned episode, and I was thrilled to hear Audra experience FF6 for the first time.
I know, wasn't it so great?
Yeah, that was pretty great. There's also Rhythm Encounter every other 2 weeks, hosted mostly by Mike Salvato, mostly about RPG music, and always a great listen. We also have our partner podcast, Phoenix Edge, which is currently on hiatus, maybe slightly longer hiatus than the one I'm planning. But their episodes are mostly focused on current events within RPGs, and they mostly record their episodes live on their YouTube channel. So please follow all 3 of those podcasts, as well as Retro Encounter, on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, however you listen to and follow podcasts. Please follow all of us and leave us feedback, because we love feedback. And speaking of us loving feedback, how can you give us specific feedback as panelists and not as a website or a podcast? That's my long-winded way of saying let's share our social media, starting with you, Tina.
Okay, you can find me on Kittensoft39 on Twitter. I mostly post about games and occasionally some of my art.
Tina, you sound great for someone that was born in 1939. Just saying. throwing that out there. That has you pegged at what, around 63? No, 83. You're sounding great for 83, Tina. Sorry if that joke fell a little flat. So Jono, how can listeners find you?
After playing Salt Sanctuary, I feel like I'm 83. You can find me at Jono_Logan on Twitter, or you can send me an email at jlogan@rpgfan.com, or if you have something for Random Encounter, you can fire a message to podcast@rpgfan.com.
Excellent. And listeners, if you want to find me, while I'm not going to be podcasting for a little while, I will still be posting about video games on social media a lot. On Twitter, I'm at The Real Monsoon most of the time, at Evoker for Dogs other times, and in RPG Fans Discord, I am Monsoon Mike. So I don't know how long it'll be before I can say this again, but sincerely, especially to everyone that's wished me well while I was experiencing some burnout publicly. Thank you. Good night and good luck.